In 1960, the newly founded American Football League, or AFL, introduces the two-point conversion. Since the AFL will eventually merge with the NFL and take its history and records with it, the two-point conversion scored during this AFL season will retroactively be considered the first ever scored in NFL history. Previously, there was no possible way to score 8 points on a single trip down the field. At most, you could score a 6-point touchdown and kick an extra point. Now, you can choose to snap the ball at the 2-yard line and attempt a sort of extra 2-point mini touchdown instead of kicking that extra point. If you're in the Scorigami business, this changes everything. All of a sudden, the quest to finish with a final score in an NFL football game that has never before been seen becomes less daunting. Let's take the 11s, for example. The column carries the winning team score, and as you can see here, only 11-7 has ever been achieved entering 1960. The row carries the losing team score, and here we see it's a completely wide open chasm. No losing team has ever scored 11 to this point in history. To understand why 11 is so difficult to reach, let's look at the one and only time it ever did happen as of 1960. In a 1937 game against Brooklyn, Washington got there by scoring a touchdown but then missing the extra point, then kicking a field goal to get to a somewhat unusual 9, then blocking a punt to add an exotic 2-point safety. Very unlikely. Now, though, you could simply score a touchdown, add a very makeable 2-point conversion, and throw on a field goal to get to 11. No safety required. And if you can get yourself to 11, you're only a common 7-point score away from 18. Another number very ripe for Scorigami. A lot of numbers all over this board are suddenly open for business. Scorigami is about to experience a boom. Through which mechanisms have we received this blessing? How did the 2-point conversion wind up in pro football a full 40 years after the founding of the NFL? That question takes a few minutes to answer, but I got time if you got time. It's 1930 in Russ County, Texas. Dad Joyner is a famed wildcatter, that is to say he drills oil wells where previously no oil has ever been found in search of petrologami, guess you could call it. Struggling financially at age 70, Joyner is still looking for his first big score. He's firmly convinced oil is to be found around here, but at the well-known as Daisy Bradford, the drill bit gets stuck. A short ways away, he attempts Daisy Bradford number 2. His equipment breaks down. Now flailing and running out of options, he hauls the rest of his equipment toward a third site, but the wagons break down. Now completely out of options, he calls a Hail Mary, stopping right there, drilling Daisy Bradford number 3 and hoping for the best. Oil gushes out of the ground with such velocity that it covers nearby trees from top to bottom. Upon striking oil, he's mobbed by ecstatic investors who think they're in for a big payday. What they don't know is that Joyner has really stepped in it. In the midst of a desperate cash grab, he'd wildly oversold, promising a 1/8 interest to one investor, a 1/16 interest to another investor, and so on, which would have been fine, except he didn't stop once he sold 100%. It's thought that in total, he sold 12 times more than is mathematically possible. One man in the crowd cozies up to Joyner and says, "Listen, I know as well as you do that your math doesn't add up. I know as well as you do that once it's time to pay out, you're done for. Give this over to me, and I will make your problems disappear." This is in the thick of the Great Depression. This man is not any better off financially than Joyner, but as the story goes, this guy amassed enough capital to enter the oil business in the first place by winning big in poker, at one point taking in a massive $4,000 haul from a gang of outlaws while working as a logger in New Mexico, and then running miles through the woods to flee for his life. His name is Haroldson Lafayette Hunt. H.L. Hunt takes over the operation and performs all the necessary jiu-jitsu to undo Joyner's overselling. Joyner dies flat broke. Hunt soon finds that what Joyner struck and what Hunt now oversees is what will be known as the East Texas oil field. In our time, it still ranks as the second largest oil field ever discovered in the United States. Despite Hunt's sudden, extraordinary wealth, he at first retreats from media attention, so much so that Life magazine has to settle for a blurry snapshot of him taken from the street without his permission. When Hunt finally does emerge into the public eye, he does so as perhaps the most powerful far-right political force in America. He writes a novel in which he outlines his utopian vision of a society in which the more money you have, the more votes you get, such that the working class's voting power shrinks to essentially nothing. In an unusual moment of transparency for these types, Hunt was explicitly opposed to the very concept of democracy itself, regarding democracy as a communist plot devised by Satan. He sees President John F. Kennedy as a political enemy, and after Hunt dies, his family will be compelled to categorically deny allegations that he personally knew Lee Harvey Oswald and facilitated Kennedy's assassination in Dallas. Hunt is a hardcore segregationist, throwing his support behind like-minded figures ranging from George Wallace to Nation of Islam's Elijah Muhammad. He broadcasts his political platform to a listenership of 5 million through a national radio program he finances. Ventures like this one have vaulted Hunt from being merely obscenely rich to being the most independently wealthy person on the planet. Wealthier than J. Paul Getty, or the Rockefellers, or Howard Hughes, or anybody. Hunt insists that every night he and his family eat dinner in silence while listening to his radio show, which during ad breaks runs commercials for GastroMagic, the digestive tablets he sells. Interestingly, he seems more proud of GastroMagic than any other tentacle of his business empire. Each night, when the commercial begins playing, he reaches over from the dinner table and cranks up the volume on the radio. Now, one of the kids growing up in this household, or rather, these households, plural, because H.L. Hunt is a bigamist who, as the Washington Post explains, is for decades simultaneously married to multiple women in multiple homes with multiple sets of children. He illegally marries his second wife without telling her he's still married to his first wife. When she finds out, he replaces her with another woman with whom he has 5 more kids, while again still married to his first wife. In all, H.L. Hunt's Lazy Susan of families produces a total of 15 children. He identifies one of those children as being the smartest of all of them. The Scorigami board does not exist in Lamar Hunt's time, but if it did, I'm willing to bet he'd love it. His siblings nickname him Games on account of his insatiable appetite for any kind of competitive venture. Lamar, thanks to his father's monomaniacal obsession with wealth, is heir to one of the largest family fortunes in the history of civilization, so he has all the horses he needs to take on any entity he wants. And in the late 50s, Lamar has decided that that entity is the NFL. Although an NFL team was previously placed in Lamar's hometown of Dallas just a few years prior and lasted only one embarrassing season, he's dead set that Dallas is where he will found an NFL franchise. When he offers to buy the Chicago Cardinals and move him there, he's told, no, we're never putting a team in Dallas. When he lobbies to land an expansion franchise, he's told, no, we're never putting a team in Dallas. When he says, fine, I'll start my own football league in the form of the AFL, the NFL freaks out and immediately offers to give him a team in Dallas. Then Lamar says, nah, I'm good, got my own league now. The NFL freaks out some more and starts their own team in Dallas just to cut him off at the pass, which makes Hunt very upset. Both teams survive to this day, with Hunt's franchise, the Texans, soon moving to Kansas City to become the Chiefs. The two have combined for 9 wins in the Super Bowl, which Hunt himself named. He's also a major reason the NFL has as many teams as it does. When the AFL proves threatening enough to the NFL to compel a merger in 1970, the NFL initially only wants to extend invites to a couple of teams, like they did during the AAFC merger. Lamar says, nope, take all 8 of us or the deal's off. The Jets, Bills, Patriots, Chargers, Oilers, Raiders, and Broncos, along with the Chiefs, join the NFL. Before the merger is agreed to, the two leagues continue to battle for territory, with the AFL adding teams in Miami and Cincinnati, and the NFL planting its flag in Minnesota, Atlanta, and New Orleans. All these teams survive to this day. The NFL lionizes Lamar Hunt accordingly as a sort of kindly, grandfatherly visionary, but he is the son of H.L. Hunt. Lamar is the guy who, while owner of the Chiefs, goes along with a scheme to buy up the world's supply of silver after his brother, the appropriately named Bunker, declares that the end times are nigh and silver will be the official currency of the apocalypse because the Bible said so. Where in the Bible does it say that? Not important. Anyway, the move backfires disastrously and almost wipes out the Hunt family fortune. Lamar Hunt is also his own man, however. In total contrast from both his segregationist father and the NFL, he pushes the AFL to proactively recruit black players to an extent that the 1960s NFL, despite the nudge forward by the AAFC years prior, still does not. I think it's a little generous to frame Hunt as a, quote, champion of black rights when there's a major and obvious profit incentive for doing so, but still, credit where it's due. It's part of Hunt's overall strategy to do what the NFL will not: expand into new markets, make the game more exciting by encouraging more scoring, and here is where we finally get to it: introduce the two-point conversion. It was first adopted by college football 2 years prior to the AFL's inaugural season after the extra point kick, which had become near automatic, was correctly identified as dull and stupid. And although the NFL had always historically followed college ball's lead, the idea of adopting an entirely new kind of score was seen as a bridge too far. The two-point conversion is found in the NFL record books of the 60s because a merger with the AFL also carries over the AFL's records and statistics. That merger happened because of Lamar Hunt, whose leverage was backed by immense wealth that intimidated the NFL. Lamar enjoyed that immense wealth because his father, HL, pursued it relentlessly. HL was perfectly positioned for that pursuit because he made the right move at the right time to a hamstrung oil man, and that oil man stumbled upon a generational fortune because his wagons just happened to break down at the exact right spot. So, if you were wondering what needs to happen for a new type of score to find its way into the NFL, the answer is a lot of things.
The very first two-point conversion attempted in pro football comes courtesy of the Oakland Raiders on the AFL's very first weekend of play in September of 1960. Down 16 late versus the Oilers, a Tom Flores touchdown pass can potentially make it a one-score game with a successful deuce. Flores indeed gets it as the Raiders make things interesting at the end. It's ultimately too little, too late as Johnny Carson puts on a show and carries Houston to victory. But who cares about mere winning and losing? The power of this new tool in unlocking previously untouched scores is immediately evident as it provides us with the league's first ever 37-22 final. A few years later, in 1963, the division rival Broncos and Chargers are led by two men that go way back like a car seat. Denver head coach Jack Faulkner had played for San Diego head coach Sid Gilman in college at Miami of Ohio before going on to coach Gilman's secondaries for over a decade, first staying in Ohio for 6 years with the Bearcats before Gilman brought Faulkner with him to Southern California, initially with the Rams, then for a couple years with the upstart Chargers. Now in year 2, after the division rival Broncos poached Faulkner, Mentee gets the best of Mentor in the season's first matchup, and apparently tries to rub it in a little bit at the end of a 50-34 Scorigami. In the rematch to close the regular season, Gilman's Chargers turn the tables and are thoroughly kicking the ass of Faulkner's Denver squad. They're up 50-20 with just a few seconds remaining when Sid decides to tack on another touchdown for the 36-point lead. And increasing that to 37 with an extra point isn't good enough either. Gilman goes for 2 and gets it. An unprecedented score of 58-20. But wait, there's more. With just 6 ticks remaining and nursing a 38-point lead, Gilman kicks onside. Afterwards, Faulkner is pissed at his longtime mentor, declaring to sever all ties to him. Gilman responds with some nonsensical nonsense, likely with tongue planted firmly in cheek, and we thus have the stories of pettiness behind the first ever 50-34 and 58-20 ball games.
That's part of the magic of Scorigami. A weird score is more than just a weird pairing of numbers. There is always a story behind it that manufactured those numbers, and usually it's a good one. Throughout this chapter of our story, we're going to focus primarily on 4 franchises that, for better or for worse, drew the attention of the Scorigami gods. At times, Scorigami appears to either bless or haunt a football team for prolonged stretches of time. These 4 teams are the Raiders, Giants, Broncos, and 49ers. First, we will visit the Raiders, who in the 1960s are chosen by Scorigami. They'll be involved in 22 acts of Scorigami this decade, but 2 in particular are almost entirely unique in that they made everybody, and I mean everybody, mad. A game that ends in a tie is usually deflating for everybody involved, but at the end of this one in 1964, Raiders coach Al Davis and Patriots coach Mike Holovac are so infuriated that both men can barely form complete sentences. The fact that this one finished 43-43, the highest scoring tie the NFL has ever seen to this day, probably has something to do with that. The target of Davis's ire is his own Pro Bowl running back Clem Daniels, who set this all in motion. From a Scorigami perspective, this had been a perfectly normal game that followed the beaten paths of the 7-3. The red lines here reflect lead changes. Up 34-28 in the fourth and hoping to put the game on ice, Daniels hauled in a pass but then fumbled it away. The subsequent Patriots touchdown put them up 35-34, which of course is two-point conversion catnip. It compelled the Raiders to then go for 2 after their touchdown, which would have safely put them up by 7, but they failed, which instead left them with a goofy 40-35 lead. The Pats answered with another TD, then themselves decided to go for 2 in order to protect themselves from a loss in the event of a subsequent field goal. Smart, because the Raiders do just that in the final seconds, and in an era before overtime rules, That's that. On account of both its volume and its offset nature, 43 is a very difficult number to reach for one team, let alone two. And now that we actually do have overtime periods that prevent nearly all would-be ties, I think the NFL could operate under present rules for another 500 years and never see another 43-43. This was all thanks to the fumble from poor Clem Daniels, who Al Davis is now excoriating in full view of the media, not hesitating for even a second to throw his own player under the bus. But Clem, you're a hero to us. The second game that radiates pure outrage in every direction occurs a few years later in Week 11 of 1968. The Raiders, by now an AFL powerhouse, play host to another top contender, the arch-rival Jets. Everything about the AFL is bigger, better, and dumber than the NFL, including the rivalries. While the Jets were practicing in California days before the game, Jets coach Weeb Ewbank grew paranoid that every passing helicopter was personally sent by Al Davis to spy on them. On another occasion, he thought Davis had planted a mole in the building overlooking their practice field. It's a lamp, dude. It's fine. It's a lamp. Anyway, this is perhaps the season's most anticipated regular season game in either the AFL or the NFL, and neither team disappoints, with quarterbacks Daryle Lamonica and Joe Namath both passing for more than 300 yards. The Raiders lead at the half 14-12, with New York stuck at an unusual 12 thanks to a failed two-point try. That gives way to a more unusual 19 after a touchdown, and here we now see how the two-point roll can serve as a sort of Scorigami force multiplier. When the Raiders answer with 6 to pull back into a 20-19 lead, they're now compelled to go for 2 themselves. Thanks to wonky football scoring math, a 2-point lead is unlikely to become any more valuable than a 1-point lead, but a 3-point lead would at least keep them tied in the event of a field goal. They make the two-pointer, which puts us on Scoragami red alert. The score is now 22-19, both very uncommon numbers to see on a scoreboard. These teams are on a very rare scoring track. All we need now is a little bit more volume, and we get it thanks to Namath exploiting the inexperience of Oakland rookie defensive back George Atkinson. Atkinson will go on to have an excellent career, but this has got to be the worst day of that career. Realizing he's been burned in coverage, he performs a sad theatrical belly flop, the calling card of every badly beaten defensive back of this era. Soon after, he falls on his butt and gift wraps a 50-yard touchdown strike to Don Maynard. We're in business, 26-22, which if it holds would be Scorigami. The Jets soon add a field goal to improve their lead to 29-22, which would also be Scorigami. Of course, they couldn't care less about such trivialities. The implications of this pivotal late-season battle are even greater than they used to be. The Raiders need this win if they're going to lock up the AFL's West Division. In the early years of the AFL, the West champ would play the East champ for the league title, and that would be the end of it. But now, the AFL champion moves on to face the NFL champion in the Super Bowl. The Raiders made it there last season only to lose badly to the NFL's Packers. They and the Jets and everybody else in the AFL are sick of playing little brother. They all want the chance to knock the NFL down a peg. That is what is at stake here, and the Raiders respond accordingly with a drive culminating in a Fred Biletnikoff touchdown, 29-29, with under 4 minutes remaining. Another potential Scorigami. With a minute and change left, the Jets counter with a field goal, 32-29, yet another score that would be the first of its kind ever. Somehow, the scoring is still far from over. The thrilling finish that awaits these teams and their fans is unlike anything any of them have ever seen. 1-minute drills simply do not happen in this era of American football, and yet, on the Raiders' first play from scrimmage, Daryle Lamonica hits Charlie Smith for a 20-yard gain to bring them to their own 42-yard line. They benefit further from a face mask call that suddenly puts the Raiders on the Jets' 43-yard line. Does Lamonica have it in him? With only seconds remaining, does he have one more throw that can take him the rest of the way to the end zone and cap off one of the most... When grandfather finally leads his estranged granddaughter up the hill, backlit by a breathtaking vista of the Swiss Alps, and allows her into his home, the scene that awaits her is perhaps more than a little less breathtaking, but perfectly suitable nonetheless. It's clear that grandfather lives in a state of comfort.
You sleep up there.
Surely a suitable bed awaits this poor little girl at the top of these stairs. Surely, after a young lifetime of being passed around from one relative who doesn't want her to the next, she'll be offered a decent home. What she finds instead at the top of these steps is an ordinary hayloft fit only for a house mouse. And yet she's delighted. It's a display of spiritual resilience that ought to be rewarded, and it just isn't.
Will you hear my prayers?
Say your prayers to God. You need no intermediary.
Heidi is only asking for the smallest gesture of warmth from her grandfather, but it's just as well that she's denied. Hey, did I lose you just now? Are you wondering why we're talking about this Did you find this sudden change of programming confusing, perhaps even frustrating? Well, good. Now you know what it feels like. Now you know what it feels like for the many millions of fans across the eastern seaboard whose fingers were piercing through the naga hide of their armchairs, staring unblinking and breathless as Daryl LaMonica's Raiders took them on one last white-knuckle adventure toward the Jets' end zone, only for NBC to cut away and begin broadcasting the made-for-television film Heidi, precisely when the clock struck 7. NBC had failed to fully appreciate the ramifications of cutting away from the broadcast in the final minute or so of the game because they weren't used to a game running past its allotted time because there had never before been a game like this. Football fans all over the country called NBC headquarters to complain, so many that it blew the fuses in their switchboard. In New York, hundreds of Jets fans decided that the correct course of action was to simply call the police, which overwhelmed the switchboards there. New York City police nonetheless failed to apprehend either Heidi or her grandfather. Here are the things Jets fans missed, perhaps for the better. An immediate 43-yard touchdown from LaMonica to Charlie Smith to give the Raiders a 36-32 lead. This would have been a mere standard Scorigami that will be repeated in 2012 were it not for a fumble on the subsequent kickoff that the Raiders returned to lock in the final score of 43-32. Most know this as the Heidi game. We know it as Eternal Scorigami. Either way, no one's seen anything else quite like it. Many didn't see it at all.
Speaking of things no one else has ever seen, well, that eternal Scorigami occurred in the third year of the Super Bowl era. Back in its debut season of 1966, New York's other team loses such a game in DC in which both squads combine to generate the NFL's only all-time 16 touchdown game. The 113 total points are a full 7 more than any other game through the league's first 105 plus years. The kickers for the Giants and Glee Club are Hungarian brothers Pete and Charlie Gogolak respectively, and they sure do get their kicks in, with the siblings on arch-rival organizations teaming up for an NFL record 14 successful extra points. And down 69-41 with just 7 ticks remaining, Giants rookie quarterback Tom Kennedy throws the ball out of bounds to stop the clock in hopes of pulling 28 points out of his ass in 3 seconds. Just one problem. That was 4th down. Thanks to Charlie then immediately squeezing in a delectable buzzer-beating field goal for Washington, it also remains the only regular season game in which a team surpassed 70 points. Good news for Giants fans though, their coach vows nothing like this will ever happen again. The very next week, something like this happens again. Multiple somethings, actually. Seeking redemption in Cleveland, they waste no time in racing out to a lead on the very opening kickoff, and that lead swells to 20 in the second half thanks to strong play all around, including Joe Morrison pulling off a jaw-dropping catch when, while double-teamed, he somehow hauls in a no-look, over-the-shoulder touchdown in the snow with his bare hands. Through 57 minutes, they're still cruising, up 40-28. They then proceed to completely melt down and allow 3 touchdowns in the final 3 minutes, not only finding a way to lose, but doing so by multiple scores. So despite again scoring at least 40 points, they again managed to whip up a decisive multi-score loss. And then the Giants and their beleaguered and battled defense take the field the following week to play another game of football. Perhaps returning home after those back-to-back drubbings on the road will give them a bit of a boost. Facing the Steelers, they do indeed get off to a good start when Spider Lockhart's interception kills Pittsburgh's opening possession, but things quickly get out of hand from there. After seeing his team do nothing but go in reverse near the shadow of their own goal line, the Giants need to punt, and thanks to an injury to their regular, they summon Lockhart, the very man who got him the ball, to do so. A novice at this new trade, that immediately manifests itself with a mishandled snap and safety, setting us on high alert for Scorigami. Late in the contest, the Giants trail 40-21 with the Steelers lining up for a field goal, a situation that would push it to a 22-point, 4-score, game-clinching margin. But it's a fake. Holder Dick Hoke reprises his role as running back in picking up the first down on an 11-yard scamper. Shortly thereafter, they again forego a short, game-clinching field goal and again convert before eventually banging it in. On the ensuing extra point try, a bad snap causes Hoke to abort the kick, where he's got the presence of mind to improvise and keep the play alive until he spots an open teammate whom he hits to get that conversion worth a single point here in the NFL. This might be the only time I've ever seen a holder in a kicking formation execute multiple successful conversions in a game, let alone within a single possession. If the score holds, it'll be the first ever 47-21 game, but more will come in the future. No, the Scorigami gods have something far bigger in mind. Sensing immortality, Giants quarterback Tom Kennedy heroically leads his squad downfield to tack on a garbage time touchdown to bring the score to 47-28, and that is the only such game as of 2025. This means that the 1966 New York Football Giants have participated and gotten waxed in 3 eternal Scorigamis in a row. Never mind that we are pretty much guaranteed to never see a team do this again. It's absolutely flabbergasting that this ever happened in the first place. It was made possible by an endless menagerie of bizarre events. 2 brothers kicking against each other, disastrous game management, botched holds that miraculously ended up as scores, but also by a 3-game stretch of defensive ineptitude that resides in its own solar system. These are the points allowed per defensive play in every team game of the Super Bowl era. The math crunches out such that on average, a team gives up about 1/3 of a point per defensive snap. As you can see, the herd starts to really thin out once you get to double that mark. To give up an entire point per defensive play is almost unheard of. Within this sample of more than 28,000 games, it's only happened 15 times. These 3 Giants losses, which again came consecutively, are here, and here. And I think I'm just gonna let you stare at that for a second. Sometimes 3 dots say more than 1,000 words ever could.
It's the 1970s. The merger has been completed. The league adds a couple more teams, the Bucks and Seahawks, so within just a few years, the size of the league is more than doubled, from 12 teams to 28. And yet, Scorigami is declining. You can see that in 1977, more NFL games are being played than ever before, with more than 200 this season. The payoff? Only 3 Scorigami all year. One major reason for this is that the AFL, as part of its assimilation, was forced to give up its beloved 2-point conversion. The driving engine behind so many 1960 Scorigami is now taken off the table. And while the NFL does continue to monkey around with its rules, it does so in ways that, if anything, reduce the potential for Scorigami. In 1974, in the latest installment of an endless back-and-forth saga we will visit in detail later, the NFL pushes the goalpost from the goal line to the back of the end zone. This results in fewer made field goals and fewer points. In Figure 6, we can review the average number of points both teams combine to score in a game in any given year. Over here, we can see the enormous amount of progress made on the offensive side of the ball in the 30s and 40s. In the late 40s, the AAFC helped increase scoring even further, and after the merger, scoring waned. We can observe a very similar effect before and after the AFL merger, an effect exacerbated by all those would-be field goals the league misses out on because field goals are now tougher to kick. In large part, Scorigami has fallen off because scoring itself has fallen off. There's simply less to work with, less clay with which to sculpt Scorigami. In 1977, the league's average points per game falls below 35 for the first time since World War II. As defenses like the Steel Curtain and Jerry Glanville's Grits Blitz terrorize quarterbacks across the league, offenses get stuck in the mud and final scores keep slipping into the same old divots. So, the league evolves, by way of both offensive innovation and rule changes. Tacticians like Jerry Burns, Bill Walsh, and Don Coryell begin to pry open more vertical, deep passing. The league implements passing-friendly changes, such as the Mel Blount rule, which, beginning in 1978, prevents a defender from making physical contact with a receiver once he's 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. Suddenly, receivers can actually do their jobs, and quarterbacks are equipped with good ideas for getting them the ball, so scoring rebounds league-wide. All throughout football's history, those in charge have introduced all sorts of changes, from small tweaks to fundamental overhauls, in order to optimize the product on the field. But don't worry, football is still really, really stupid. I promise. This is such a fundamentally stupid and silly sport, and no amount of sanitization, legislation, or innovation will ever be able to change that. I'm gonna prove it to you. Let's skip a few years ahead to 1984. What is the most Scorigami game ever played? I don't necessarily mean the most extreme Scorigami or the rarest or the hardest to reach. I mean the one game across all of NFL history that captures the spirit of Scorigami more comprehensively than any other game. You can name any one of 50 or so games, and you might even be right. My answer to this question plays out during Week 5 of the 1984 season in Anaheim, California, where the Los Angeles Rams host the New York Giants. Here comes the opening kickoff. If you saw nothing but the box score of this game, you'd imagine that this game was played in typhoon conditions. Nothing of the sort, right? Rams return man A.J. Jones loses the ball in the sun, then runs back to recover the ball. I said runs back to recover the ball. Dude, this is a live ball. You gotta go get it. Ah, dang it. Presumably, Jones mistook kicking rules for punting rules, which state that the coverage team cannot recover the ball unless the receiving team touches it first, but that is a live ball. This is a kickoff. You could play a football game in a laboratory under NFL rules and tell both teams to work together and do whatever they need to do to get a touchdown from either team on the board as quickly into a game as physically possible, and they would not be able to do much better than this. Of course, it's only a touchdown, which is hardly remarkable in the Scorigami sense, but as we've seen, Scorigami tends to arrive hand in hand with other unusual phenomena. One was certainly this kickoff non-return, and we see a second immediately. Giants kicker Ali Haji Sheikh trots up to attempt an extra point he needs to make to shore up his shaky confidence. Last year, he broke the all-time NFL record for most made field goals in a season with 35, but he's missed 3 of his 4 attempts so far this season. It'll get to the point at which he starts going by the nickname Ali Haji Shank, a nickname he himself will come up with. This season, kickers make about 97% of their extra points. Haji Sheikh misses this one.
Tax on the extra point. No, it's no good, they say now.
Well, maybe that's not ominous, it's just unfortunate. Here's ominous for you. Today, Haji Sheikh will miss another extra point as well as a field goal. To this day, he remains the only kicker of the last 60 years and change to attempt a field goal and multiple extra points and miss them all. And of course this, by dumb luck, also just happens to be one of the only games ever in which a kickoff, which came off Haji Sheikh's foot, immediately resulted in a touchdown for his team. So he can't kick a field goal, he can't kick an extra point, but he can kick a touchdown. Imagine how his goalpost must feel. Its old buddy Ali Haji Sheikh no longer needs it to score points. He's found a way to kick points without it. So, in the second quarter, figuring that Haji Sheikh has given it the rest of the day off, it stretches out and takes a little nap.
Let me say, first of all, that the problem is not with your set. Your screen is not sideways.
The theory is that the goalpost somehow got stuck in the netting behind the end zone, then the netting met a stiff breeze and pulled the goalpost down. This is the only time I have ever seen or heard of a goalpost falling over on its own in the middle of a game. Question though, what if the goalpost had started keeling over in the middle of one of Ali's field goal attempts and a kick that would have sailed wide instead flies right through the falling uprights? You'd have to count it, right? That philosophical question would pull us too far away from the subject at hand, Scorigami, which, despite all the wild phenomena we've already seen so far, still doesn't seem likely on paper. At the half, the score is a very conventional Rams 17, Giants 6. We've seen nothing to indicate Scorigami. We're about to. In the third quarter, the Rams back up the Giants' offense inside their own 1-yard line and force a punt. Whenever this happens, the punter, who typically takes the snap about 15 yards deep, only has room to move back 10 yards. To special teams return units and spectators alike, this has safety written all over it. And that is exactly what happens. Forced a punt out of a phone booth, Dave Jennings fails to get the ball off his foot in time, and it's blocked out of the back of the end zone for 2 points. On the next possession, the Giants again find themselves backed up against their own end zone. The Rams defense gets the Giants quarterback Phil Simms to notch their second consecutive safety. To record 2 safeties in a game is extraordinarily rare. It's only happened 26 times in the entire 105-year history of the league, but for them to come in the same quarter on back-to-back possessions, that is a special kind of humiliation. So if we think of Scorigami as some sort of unholy potion burbling in a witch's cauldron, this is the Eye of Newt. By scoring 2 safeties, they've chucked a wildly irregular 4 into the pot. Late in the third, this Giants offense is jammed up inside its own 5-yard line again. Oh my god, this might happen a third time with the pass rush all over him. Simms retreats as far as he can and flings it safely out just before his foot steps out of bounds. That was so unbelievably close to the Rams' third safety of the quarter, an event of such unlikelihood that it's barely conceivable. Having narrowly escaped catastrophe, the Giants now at least get to punt it away. Dave Jennings has to do so from the back of his own end zone again, but unlike last time, he actually does get the luxury of a full 15 yards behind the line to spread out, so take it easy, Dave. Nice and easy there. Yep. Oh, no! As if to taunt the Giants, the loose ball bounces at the boundary of the end zone before dribbling right alongside it and staying in. The Giants at least recover the ball themselves to prevent a Rams touchdown, but you know what that means? A third safety. Entering 2025, this remains the only game ever in which one team recorded 3 safeties, and the Rams scored all 3 of them in the same quarter. This happened in the same game in which a record-breaking kicker missed literally all his kicks, and a guy straight up forgot to return the opening kickoff, and one of the goalposts fell down. It is arguably the stupidest game the NFL has ever seen. But you know what else this means? It means that this game, the game I told you was the most Scorigami game of all time, is not a Scorigami. The final score is 33-12, a score that already happened more than 50 years ago. If the Rams had stopped at 1 safety, the final score could have been the first 29-12 game ever. It would have been a Scorigami were it not for those 2 extra, astronomically unlikely safeties. 1 safety produces 2 very rare points, but 3 safeties produce 6 incredibly common points. You may as well have just made 2 field goals. It's no more special than that. This is the cruel elusiveness of Scorigami. It rewards weirdness, yes, but if you get too weird, you'll horseshoe right back around to the realm of the ordinary. Scorigami punishes you for an excess of the very thing it wanted of you in the first place. No one ever said it was fair. Certainly not the Denver Broncos of the 1980s. January 25th, 1987. Entering this evening, the Denver Broncos have been pretty quiet on the Scorigami front in recent times, having participated in just 2 Scorigami over the previous decade. Tonight's game, Super Bowl 21, is so far unfolding just as conventionally. Up 10-7 just minutes before halftime, John Elway drops back to throw on 3rd down. Giants mainstay George Martin pries himself loose on the edge and gets to Elway in the end zone for a safety. This precise moment commences Scorigami's decades-long haunting of the Denver Broncos, who will be punished in manners unusual by the phenomenon of Scorigami again and again and again. For starters, this game's flow is permanently altered from this moment forward, with the Giants scoring 26 unanswered points to flip a 10-7 deficit into a 33-10 lead. The final score eventually settles in at Giants 39, Broncos 20. This is not only the first ever Super Bowl Scorigami, but an eternal Scorigami that has never been repeated. I guess 39-20 is kind of weird, but if you're a hardcore football fan, let me ask you something. Does 39-20 really seem to you like a score so rare that it's only happened once ever? Because it surprises me. Let's take this cue to once again appreciate how odd football scoring math really is, this time in comparison with other sports. If you chart every single score an NBA team has ended up with in every single game in NBA history, you end up with this. The most common NBA point totals of all time are 102 and 103, but both totals account for just a tick under 3% of all point totals ever. They're barely more common than finishing a game with 96 points, or 100, or 110. The distribution is so strikingly parabolic, which makes sense because A, there are tons and tons of scoring events in a game, and B, those events almost always result in 1, 2, or 3 points. No number is difficult to reach unless it's just plain really high or really low. That's not to say that there isn't magic here. NBA Scorigami can be pretty interesting if you play with the concept a little, but even here there are things to be fascinated by. For instance, the 2 lowest team scores ever, 18 and 19, came from 2 teams playing each other in the very same game, and the 2 highest scores ever, 184 and 186, also occurred in the exact same game. That is plenty fascinating. This takes a different form in Major League Baseball, but the core principle is the same. More than 2/3 of the time, a team scores between 0 and 5 runs in a game. Baseball Scorigami can only ever occur if one or both teams score a ton of runs. Neither of these sports allow for any true eccentricity on the scoreboard, and you can see that in these relics. They're sculpted not by freak occurrences or Byzantine scoring rules, but by the winds of regular, ordinary scoring blowing over them and slowly shaping them over the eons. Now, let's look at the NFL. Hideous. It looks like the bristles on a 10-year-old toothbrush. 17s happen all the time, 18s rarely happen. 24s happen a lot, 25s are incredibly sparse, and now, back to that 39 the Giants scored on the Broncos. 38 would have been fairly run-of-the-mill, but adding that 1 point resulted in a score so unruly that it couldn't even be tempered by the decidedly normal 20 it was paired with. 2 seasons later, the Broncos give up exactly 39 points, again, in an eternal Scorigami, again, 39-21 right next door to their last one. This one comes at the hands of the Steelers, who booted 6 field goals to complement their 3 touchdowns and wind up at 39. The very next week, the Broncos give up another Scorigami loss, and although it's not eternal, it's an even worse defeat, 55-23 to the Colts and Eric Dickerson, who doormats them for 3 rushing TDs in the first quarter alone. It's 1 week later that the Scorigami gods extend the Broncos an extraordinary gesture of kindness. An unbelievable third Scorigami in as many weeks, which this time they win, 17-11 over the Chiefs. This one is an ultra-coveted low Scorigami. In the 80s, and even more so in our time, these are extremely tough to get. There's limited real estate up here, and after all these decades, every reasonably achievable score has been squatted on. But the funny thing is, a game doesn't have to go completely upside down in order to achieve a score as difficult as 17-11. All you really need to do is take an otherwise boring game and add exactly one exotically stupid idea. And that's what we see here early in the game, with the Broncos backed all the way up to their own 6-inch line or so. A drive that begins here is extremely unlikely to result in a touchdown or field goal. Their priority here should be to at least create a little bit of breathing room for a likely eventual punt. Any other team in this situation would almost certainly just line up tight and punch it up the middle for a yard or two, a safe, high-floor, low-ceiling option. Broncos coach Dan Reeves has another, way worse idea. Let's set one of our running backs a full 8 yards back in the end zone. Let's make that running back Tony Dorsett, who, while a Hall of Famer and legend in his own right, is now 1 million years old and has 12,000 yards of tread on his tires. Let's have Elway pitch it backwards to him so he has to travel all the way through Mordor just to break even and escape the end zone. Kansas City's Dino Hackett, amazed that the Broncos would even try this, records a very predictable safety and single-handedly transforms this game into Scorigami. The Scorigami gods leave the Broncos alone for a year or so, during which they right the ship and advance to Super Bowl 24. It's here where they get absolutely dusted by the 49ers 55-10 in what stands today as the worst Super Bowl loss of all time. There's nothing artful about this Scorigami. No safeties and nothing remotely eccentric save for one missed San Fran extra point. The Niners built this Scorigami on them through pure volume and brute force, and they built it to last. There has never been another 55-10 game in the NFL since. Yep, that's right. To this point in history, there have been 2 Super Bowl Scorigami. Both, interestingly, are eternal Scorigami, and both, incredibly, have been absolute clobberings of the Denver Broncos. And although the Scorigami gods very clearly hate the Broncos of the 1980s, they sure do take a shine to the Niners of the 1990s.
In October 1993, the 49ers welcomed the Vikings to their baseball stadium. Powered by a Minnesota safety when Henry Thomas sacks Niner quarterback Steve Young along the first baseline, the game transforms what would have otherwise been an ordinary 38-17 set of 7s and 3s that had been the final score of 22 previous contests and instead becomes the 38-19 Scorigami. 7 games later, the 49ers welcomed the Bengals to their football stadium. Powered by a Cincinnati safety when Alfred Williams sacks Young in the end zone, the game transforms what would have otherwise been an ordinary 21-6 set of 7s and 3s that had been the final score of 12 previous contests and instead becomes the only 21-8 ballgame through more than a century and counting. The Niners then immediately experience what is quite literally the second biggest pendulum swing possible when they go from winning the lone game of its kind to losing a 27-24 decision in Atlanta, which historically is a more frequent final score than any other except 2017. Well, that is quite the roller coaster, just don't dislodge the restraint quite yet. Right after that's a trip to the Motor City to face a Lions squad missing its engine while Young and the rest of the Niners are firing on all cylinders the entire game. They score to cap all 9 of their possessions that aren't truncated by the end of a half in boat racing the Lions 55-17. The game only includes 7s and 3s, but the abundance of them on one side launch it to eternal Scorigamihood. After wrapping up a regular season in which their 3 Scorigamic wins matched the total of the other 27 NFL teams combined, and their 2 eternally Scorigamic wins were 2 more than the other 27 teams combined, the 93 Niners turn their attention to the postseason, where their first matchup is against the New York Giants. San Francisco thoroughly dominates the proceedings from start to finish, racking up 6 touchdowns and a field goal while allowing but a single field goal. However, one missed extra point transforms what would have otherwise been a 45-3 set of 7s and 3s that had been the final score of 10 previous contests and instead becomes the only 44-3 ball game through more than a century and counting. It runs their Scorigami win output this season to 4 total, exceeding the 3 the rest of the league collectively managed, and 3 are of the eternal variety when the rest of the league got collectively goose-egged.
Almost entirely by themselves, these 1993 San Francisco 49ers have kept the Scorigami flame alight. That's the good news. The bad news is that the year prior, in '92, there was only one Scorigami league-wide. In other sports, scores are only capable of being unusual on account of their volume. In baseball, for instance, when the Rangers beat the Astros 30-3, it was only interesting on account of the sheer number of runs scored. There was nothing inherently special about the totals themselves, no intrinsic numerology that told any kind of story. Football is different. These numbers carry traces, signatures, relics that tell a story. You can look at a simple pairing of numbers and guess with confidence that they're the product of some very strange events. Only football, the sport that clumsily staggers up the scoreboard as though it's wearing different sizes of shoe on each foot, can do this. It's a total, uncontainable eccentricity that sprouts from the unlikeliest of places, this stone-serious, regimented trench warfare that is, in all other respects, less like play than any other sport. And if Scorigami dies out, football will end up like every other sport, incapable of generating numerical stories through any means but pure volume. Scorigami will not die. Not here, not in the 90s, because in 1994, the NFL will reach for the one part in the drawer, the one tool in the toolbox it once swore it never would. Scorigami will thrive again. Question is, for how much longer?